While the American 24th Corps struggled to break the outer line of the Shuri defenses, in northern Okinawa, Marines of the 3rd Amphibious Corps fought a battle of their own. Originally planned as part of Phase 2 of Operation Iceberg, the neutralization of northern Okinawa was to come after the seizure of the southern part of the island. However, the unexpectedly easy landings and swift occupation of the Central Plain prompted General Simon Bolivar Buckner, Jr., commander of the 10th U.S. Army on Okinawa, to merge Phases 1 and 2, and he had every reason to do so. By accelerating the timeline and allowing the 3rd Amphibious Corps to advance north without delay, alongside the 24th Corps' push south, Buckner sought to deny the Japanese the opportunity to consolidate their forces and further fortify their positions in the area. Additionally, with much of the 5th Fleet occupied supporting the southern advance and countering relentless kamikaze attacks, the risk that the Japanese might land reinforcements from other islands in the Ryukyu chain or even the Japanese mainland grew significantly. Securing the northern part of Okinawa swiftly was therefore critical, not only to neutralize this potential threat, but also to sustain the momentum of the American campaign on the island. With all restrictions on the northward advance removed, as General Buckner stated in his message sent on April 3, 1945, to Major General Roy S. Geiger, commander of the 3rd Amphibious Corps, Geiger ordered the 6th Marine Division to proceed with the push north after securing Ishikawa Isthmus, the narrowest point of Okinawa. In the meantime, the 1st Marine Division remained behind to defend and clean up the Central Plain, dealing mainly with the Okinawan civilians and refugees clogging the roads. On April 5th, the 6th Marine Division began its advance into the rugged and densely forested northern part of the island, moving in 2 columns along largely destroyed one-way coastal roads, with the 22nd Marines moving up the west coastal road and the 4th Marines advancing along the east, and as they progressed, both regiments conducted short patrols inland. Despite facing significant logistical challenges, including navigating narrow destroyed roads and straining supply lines to their limits, the 6th Marine Division made swift progress, encountering only scattered resistance from Japanese stragglers retreating from the Yontan and Kadena airfields. By April 7th, after advancing roughly 6.5 kilometers per day, the Marines had seized Nago, the largest town in northern Okinawa, at the base of the Motobu Peninsula. There, the 6th Marine Division split its forces, with the 29th Marines starting west from Nago to clear the peninsula, and the 22nd Marines pressed northward, while the 4th Marines remained in reserve, ready to support the 29th on Motobu or the 22nd in the north. By the time the 6th Marine Division reached Nago, Motobu was largely uncharted territory for the Americans. Initial reconnaissance patrols conducted by the 29th Marines revealed the peninsula to be challenging terrain, almost like a country of its own. As the peninsula extended, the landscape rose in a series of slopes culminating in Yae-Take, a sprawling, twisted mass of rocky ridges and ravines reaching nearly 400 meters in height. Yae-Take Mountain, a labyrinth of ridges, cliffs, and gorges, proved to be the critical feature of the peninsula. The lower ridges were densely wooded, while in the upper areas the landscape transitioned to grasslands with only a few stunted trees. To the west, the hills were interrupted by the Mana River, which flowed toward an inlet near the village of Toguchi. This broken high ground, tangled with dense vegetation, made the terrain a natural fortress and proved to be a defender's dream. Indeed, aerial reconnaissance provided clear indications that the Japanese had concentrated their forces there, and it was within this harsh terrain that the Udo Force, also known as the Kunigami Detachment, commanded by Colonel Takehiko Udo, had prepared its defensive positions ready to make a determined stand. Although nominally a battalion strength, this main Japanese force in northern Okinawa was centered around the 2nd Infantry Unit detached from the 44th Independent Mixed Brigade, and was heavily reinforced, having absorbed both former sea-raiding suicide squadrons from the nearby Navy base and many other smaller units from the area, including remnants of the 1st Specially Established Regiment, decimated during the American advance across the Central Plain. Equipped with its own artillery battery, an anti-tank company, and with approximately 2,000 seasoned troops, the Udo force was closer in strength to a brigade than a battalion. Unlike other Japanese commanders on Okinawa, Colonel Udo relied less on fixed fortifications and tunnels. Instead, he developed a network of strongpoints positioned in depth, designed to maximize the advantages of the favorable terrain in which he intended to draw the Marines into a deadly game of hide-and-seek. On April 8th, the 29th Marines crossed the mouth of Motobu, deploying all 3 battalions in line, and began advancing cautiously in 3 columns along the battered coastal roads, aiming to uncover the Japanese positions on the peninsula. The next day, as the Marines pushed deeper into the rugged terrain, resistance began to mount, skirmishes erupted, and it became clear that a significant Japanese force confronted the division in the area, stretching from the villages of Itomi in the west to Toguchi, with all signs pointed toward Yae-Take, where the Japanese appeared poised for a fierce and decisive stand. On April 10th, the 2nd Battalion, operating along the northern shore, entered the deserted village of Untenko, where the Japanese had established a submarine and torpedo boat base, finding there large amounts of equipment and supplies abandoned, while local civilians reported that some 150 naval personnel had fled inland to the mountains. Meanwhile, on the other side of the peninsula, the other 2 battalions of the 29th Marines had faced growing resistance. During the day, the 3rd Battalion reached Toguchi, despite enduring a brief shelling en route by artillery and heavy mortar fire, which resulted in 16 casualties, while the 1st Battalion drove inland in a northwesterly direction to Itomi, overcoming a small ambush at the approaches to the town. By the end of the day, the 2 battalions were separated by only a 5-kilometer trail between Itomi and Toguchi, forming a near-complete encirclement of Yae-Take. However, closing the full ring around Yae-Take will prove to be a challenging task. As the 3rd Battalion attempted to push inland east from Toguchi to establish contact with the 1st Battalion on April 11th, they came under overwhelming Japanese fire at Mana, forcing them to withdraw to their starting position. Simultaneously, the 1st Battalion picked its way from Itomi along a winding trail bordered by steep slopes, only to be halted in nearly the same area as the 3rd Battalion by heavy mortar and machine gun fire from the heights, and as Marines withdrew back to Itomi, they had to force their way past another ambush on their way back. On the same day, after having encountered no opposition in the past few days, and while it became evident to intelligence officers that the main Japanese battle position was situated on the slopes of Yae-Take, Major General Lemuel C. Shepard, Jr., the 6th Marine Division's commander, ordered the 2nd Battalion, Less Company F, to discontinue operations on the northern coast and move to the vicinity of Itomi to establish defensive positions alongside the 1st Battalion. This move, however, was not enough to fully encircle the Japanese stronghold. As it became apparent that the neutralization of Japanese resistance on Yae-Take was beyond the capabilities of a single regiment, and given that the 22nd Marines progressed northward against virtually no opposition, General Shepard ordered the 4th Marines to reinforce the 29th on Motobu. In the meantime, over the next 2 days, battalions of the 29th Marines intensively patrolled around Yae-Take to probe the Japanese defenses and identify weak points in their lines. During this period, numerous contacts between patrols occurred, resulting in sharp skirmishes on harsh terrain. Ambushes became more frequent, the Japanese artillery fire increased in intensity, and night counterattacks escalated. Marine patrols venturing into the hills often found themselves engaged in savage fighting against isolated Japanese positions. After hours of grueling combat, and even after calling down precise mortar fire, when the Marines finally seized an outpost, they would often discover nothing but a trail of blood. The situation, however, could have been far worse, with significantly higher casualties, if the 29th Regiment had not had a platoon of war dogs attached. In the densely wooded area, these dogs proved invaluable. Able to sense Japanese troops from afar, they would alert the Marines to approaching threats, helping them evade many Japanese ambushes. Meanwhile, having moved on foot, the 4th Marines linked up with the 29th Marines on Motobu on April 13th in preparation for an attack on Yae-Take. The 1st and 2nd Battalions joined the 3rd Battalion of the 29th Marines, which was temporarily attached to the 4th Marines under the command of Colonel Alan Shapley, while the 3rd Battalion of the 4th Marines remained in reserve. The other 2 battalions of the 29th Marines remained under their regimental commander, Colonel Victor F. Bleasdale. On the morning of April 14th, both regiments launched a coordinated attack to eliminate the epicenter of Japanese resistance in Northern Okinawa, advancing from two opposing directions. For the Marines, the battle for Yae-Take quickly turned into a nightmarish fight against a phantom enemy. On the western flank, the 4th Marines' attack began as scheduled. From the vicinity of Toguchi, all 3 battalions advanced in line, facing initially surprisingly light resistance, challenged only by scattered mortar and light artillery fire, reaching their objective before noon. However, as they pressed forward into the lower ground toward their next objective, Japanese resistance began to stiffen. The broken terrain, covered in scrub conifers and tangled underbrush, was ideally suited for defense, and the Japanese exploited this advantage to the fullest. Determined to fight to the end, Colonel Udo adopted a passive defense, striving to preserve the men and ammunition for a prolonged battle in an attempt to tie down the Americans as long as possible. As a result, the initial opposition the Marines met consisted of small groups. Japanese soldiers would often lie concealed and wait with their weapons zeroed in on a section of a trail, allowing a significant number of Marines to pass before opening fire on select targets at close range. This tactic led to excessively high casualties among Marine officers, including Major Bernard W. Green, commanding officer of the 1st Battalion of the 4th Marines. Some assault companies changed up to 3 commanders in a single day. The entire Yae-Take Massif was swarming with Japanese troops, and engaging them directly proved difficult as they continuously changed positions within the dense vegetation, making it nearly impossible for the Marines to close in. Nevertheless, despite stubborn opposition and considerable casualties, by 4:30 a.m., the battalions under Colonel Shapley's command had advanced beyond their objective for the day and dug in for the night. While the 4th Marines pushed eastward, the 29th Marines attacked west from Itomi. However, as the attack unfolded, it became evident that advancing in a westerly direction over steep slopes and against determined resistance would be difficult and costly. As a result, both battalions were quickly pinned down by heavy Japanese fire from the high ground ahead, forcing the troops to dig in for the night without gaining much ground. The lack of the 29th Marines' progress was the most likely the main reason why General Shepard relieved Colonel Bleasdale of command on April 15th, replacing him with Colonel William J. Whaling, a seasoned veteran who had been in action since the Battle of Guadalcanal. Over the next few days, backed by naval gunfire and artillery and engaging in numerous firefights, Marines pressed forward, maintaining constant pressure from 2 directions, and as they ascended deeper into the steep and broken hill mass, they came across the heavy and effective fire from a more organized defensive line consisting of caves and pillboxes sited on dominant terrain. The fighting became extremely bitter, close, and fierce all along the line, often devolving into vicious hand-to-hand combat. Nevertheless, by systematically reducing one strong point after another, Marines advanced slowly but steadily. Yet, as they progressed further, the supply situation grew increasingly dire. Water, ammunition, and wounded personnel had to be carried on foot, causing frequent delays in moving forward and creating dangerous gaps between companies and battalions which were supposed to advance abreast. Logistic support to the fighting became so critical that every man, whether private or general, who ascended the mountain to the front lines carried either a 5-gallon water can or a case of ammunition, and on the way down, all hands helped bear stretchers carrying wounded Marines off the battlefield. On April 16th, the 3rd Battalion of the 4th Marines joined the attack advancing from the southwest, while the 29th Marines maintained relentless pressure against Yae-Take from the northeast, despite the mountain being heavily defended against an assault from this direction. Meanwhile, Colonel Shapley's troops slowly but methodically seized the southern and western ridges, one by one, using a tactic known as ridge hopping, to outmaneuver the entrenched defenders. By then, the Japanese defense had begun to crumble, and the defenders resorted to desperate measures. That night, the 1st Battalion of the 4th Marines annihilated the first fanatical Banzai charge. Furthermore, trapped in an ever-tightening perimeter, the Japanese troops became easy targets for devastating naval gunfire, and as the Marines pushed deeper into the ruined stronghold, they would often come upon a gruesome sight. Hundreds of dead Japanese sprawled within the massive craters carved by US naval shells. Yet despite these hard-fought gains, much of Yae-Take remained firmly in Japanese hands. On April 17th, the Japanese defense at Yae-Take finally collapsed. Advancing against little resistance, the assault battalions pressed forward, facing only sporadic fire from scattered, isolated pockets. When the Marines reached the summit, they found Colonel Udo's deserted command post, along with large stockpiles of equipment, ammunition, and supplies left behind in the hasty retreat, as well as hundreds of dead Japanese troops. Another 700 Japanese met their end attempting to flee across the fire-swept ridges before the advancing 4th Marines. After 4 days of vigorous combat, Marines spent April 18th consolidating the previous day's gains, reorganizing and resupplying, while patrols mopped up bypassed pockets of Japanese resistance. The following day, on April 19th, the final drive to the north coast began with the 4th and 29th Marines sweeping abreast through the peninsula against negligible resistance. By April 20th, the 6th Marine Division had reached the north coast, eliminating all organized resistance. Though General Shepard declared the Motobu Peninsula secured, the battle was far from over. Mopping up operations and the pursuit of fleeing Japanese soldiers who had fled Yae-Take dragged on for the rest of April. During this phase, war dogs once again proved invaluable in detecting hidden threats, sniffing out concealed Japanese soldiers and uncovering booby traps that would have otherwise claimed many Marine lives. With the battle at Yae-Take now over, it stood as the fiercest engagement in the northern sector, and the intensity of the fight was evident in the awarding of 2 medals of honor for just 4 days of combat. Corporal Richard Bush and Private First Class Harold Gonsalves each earned the nation's highest military decoration after throwing themselves onto Japanese grenades to save their fellow Marines. Private Gonsalves was killed instantly, while Corporal Bush miraculously survived. After the battle, Marines counted over 2,000 dead Japanese troops who had defended their positions with characteristic determination, while the 6th Marine Division suffered 207 killed, 757 wounded, and 6 missing in action. In the meantime, while the fighting raged on Motobu Peninsula, the 22nd Marines pushed north through the rugged, untamed terrain, encountering virtually no organized resistance. By April 13th, they had reached Hado Point, the northernmost point of Okinawa. However, their swift advance was deceptively easy, as the harsh and isolated landscape presented a different set of challenges. Here, the Japanese employed classic guerrilla tactics. A combination of hit-and-run attacks, sabotages, ambushes, and sudden disappearances forced the 22nd Marines to maintain constant vigilance, conducting relentless patrols and engaging in frequent small-scale skirmishes. These encounters often involved not only Japanese troops who had escaped from Motobu Peninsula, but also Okinawan irregulars. Exploiting the wilderness of the north to maximum effect, the irregular guerrilla forces harassed the Marines relentlessly, inflicting additional casualties on the 6th Marine Division. Despite their limited success, these guerrilla actions nevertheless tied down a significant number of American troops who could have been deployed elsewhere. Since the moment they landed at Hagushi Beaches on April 1st, the 6th Marine Division had advanced over 80 kilometers and had counted over 2,500 Japanese dead and captured 46 prisoners. During this period, the division had lost 236 killed, 1,061 wounded, and 7 missing. However, for them, the battle for Okinawa was far from over.